think we could get started, Rich, and start recording, or?
I just turned the record on.
All right, and Katherine?
I'm ready. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to all of you. I'm very excited about today's event on the Poets Corner. As many of you know, the Poets Corner was founded by myself and Meg Weston to create and expand community among writers and readers of poetry and short prose. We invite people to read, who have a connection to Maine, to read and to share their process as writers. Today, we will be joined by Claire Millikin, the editor of the collection Enough, Poems of Resistance and Protest, along with 9 other poets in the collection. This book, edited by Claire and Agnes Bushell, was published in late 2020 by Literal Books and addresses Maine poets' response to issues of systemic racism and economic injustice. As I've watched the very emotional unfolding of the Derek Chauvin trial, I'm thinking there is no topic more relevant than the poems in this collection that will be read to you today on the Poets Corner. I feel very personally the need for openness and understanding of all the ways that the murder of George Floyd and so many others impacts our lives. Just a reminder that we'll be recording today's event, so if you don't want your image to appear in the recording, please turn off your video. The recording will be available on our website later this week. We will not have a May event because the second Sunday is Mother's Day, and my family has surprised me with a wonderful opportunity to visit my granddaughter in Washington, D.C. on the occasion of her first birthday. I know many of the rest of you are finally getting out and about to visit family or travel in other ways after this year of sheltering in. But we'll be back in June with a very special event on Sunday, June 13th, the 1-year anniversary of the Poets Corner. And Meg will tell you more about that. After today's poets have shared, we will be open for questions from the chat. One of us will be scanning the chat during our discussion period, and we'll try to get to as many of the questions as possible. Here's Meg.
Thank you, Katherine, and thank you all for being here. Welcome to everybody for taking this beautiful Sunday spring afternoon to be here. And I'm sure you're all here as I am because you want to hear from these wonderful poets on an incredibly relevant topic. So I want to thank our readers in advance. I'll be introducing each of them, and we'll have time to hear from them, 1 or more poems, and then some time for discussion at the end. I do want to let you know about our June event because it's on Sunday, June 13th. As Katherine mentioned, the 1-year anniversary of the Poets Corner, and it's in partnership with Maine Media Workshop in College, the Writers Harbor Poetry Week. So that's a week-long event, I guess workshop, if you could sign up for if you're interested, of workshops, craft seminars, which is 3 distinguished poets: Richard Blanco, Obama's inaugural poet; Rick Barrett, who is an incredible poet from Washington State, published 3 different books of poetry, an educator. I've taken a craft seminar with him that was just wonderful on syntax. And Tess Taylor, who's written, I believe, 4 or 5 books of poetry, and she comes from the California area. Her most recent book is called Rift Zones, which speaks to me with my geological and volcanic interests, but they're 3 terrific poets. They will join us on Sunday afternoon to kick off the Writers Harbor Poetry Week for the students who have signed up for the workshop. and for all of our Poets Corner community. So I hope you will come back to join us in June. If you're interested in more information about signing up for the Poetry Week workshops, just go to Maine Media website, mainemedia.edu. So that's it. After our reading, I want to mention a few events that are going on with other folks that are of interest during April, because it's National Poetry Month in April. But I want to get right into our readings because I'm so excited about doing this, and I just think it will stimulate a lot of heartfelt emotion and thought and provoke some interesting discussion as well. So I'll start by introducing Claire Millikin. Claire is the co-editor of this volume, Enough, and along with that, Agnes Bushell. And Claire is the author of 7 books of poetry, including 3 books that were named finalists for the Maine Literary Award in Poetry: State Fair Animals, Television, and Motels Where We Lived. Her forthcoming poetry books are titled Dolls, Elegiaca, and Transitional Objects. Claire lives in Owl's Head, Maine, and I am just thrilled that you've joined us today. Maybe you'll say a couple of words about the collection and read some of your work that's in it. So please join me in welcoming Claire.
Yeah, so I just wanted to thank Poets Corner and thank Meg and Katherine on behalf of Agnes and myself for hosting us, and on behalf of all of the poets in this collection. Oh, you still can't hear me. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better. Thanks.
So I just said that I wanted to thank Poets Corner on behalf of Agnes and myself, and for hosting our reading today. I thought I would actually reserve my comments about the book for the discussion section at the end, but I am, prepared to. I do have much. I could probably talk for the whole discussion time. So yeah, which I won't do. We have a lot of people here who have many good things to say. But I will go ahead and read my own poems if I'm audible now. Am I audible?
Yeah. You are. Thank you, Claire.
Yeah. So the first poem is it's concerning the lynching that took place on July 25th in 1946 in my original home state of Georgia. The victims of the lynching were George W. and Mae Murray Dorsey, and Dorothy and Roger Malcolm. George Dorsey had just returned from serving in the United States military in the Second World War, and Dorothy Malcolm was 7 months pregnant when they were murdered on a bridge outside of Watkinsville, Georgia, above the Oconee River. The Oconee River is the river mentioned at the end of the poem. So here's the poem, July 25th, 1946. The last, or one of the last, mass lynchings in America happened 20 miles from the house in Georgia where, 25 years later, I learned to read. I can't go back there, knowing it for sky's last barrier or open door of space and time, a human bond, golden, live oaks at the end of July, hollowed by light lifting branches. It is never innocent, what I know and don't know. From grandmother before I turned 3, I learned to read a buried weather, which is to say history, unspoken by my elders, intimated. How shall I or anyone atone these unarmed men and women, innocents who did not earn what was done to them, who became sacrifice? Golden live oaks in late July carry sky opening the way a door will sway into an empty room. Keep there only books. Let no one else come in so as to preserve the semblance of an untouched place in the mind. Rain unlatches, floods sorghum fields, red acre on acre, all the way down to that bridge above the river, dividing the world. So I'm going to read one more poem or section of a poem. This is from the 7-part elegy for George Floyd that I wrote, and the section I will be reading is called Memorial Day. So, Memorial Day. A day off when you just lost your job. A $20 bill, your last, in the back of the wallet. Inside the glass-walled store, light moves untenderly through swept aisles where you find what you need, cigarettes. A day off, take it easy, strip down to your t-shirt and breathe. The store shelves tremble in a terrible new light, almost summer. Outside the store, teenage girls wearing shorts sway. A few wear masks against the virus. One girl carries a phone camera. Memorial Day is the day of elegy. Buried soldiers line their names. Maybe you had an uncle among them. Maybe he returned from the war, silenced, stunned, unwilling to name what ached in him. Memorial Day. Lay down across the counter before the cashier a $20 bill for a pack of cigarettes costing $5, enough to smoke through till next week, breath by breath. What happens next defines the phrase senseless violence, Memorial Day. For the sacrificed are ever arriving, the sacrificed who give their lives for America. Sky in the alleys, sky sways and drifts. It will be summer soon. Memorial Day is past. But the sacrificed, they are still waiting for their names to be redeemed. Mr. George Floyd was buried 10 days after Memorial Day. Say the names of the victims, the names worthy of this speaking. So that'll do it for my poems. And I look forward to hearing Donna Loring read, who I think is next up. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Very powerful work. So I'm going to introduce Donna, move right on. Donna Loring is an elder and former council member of the Penobscot Indian Nation. She held the position of the nation's representative to the Maine state legislature for over a decade. She recently served as the senior advisor of tribal affairs to Maine Governor Janet Mills. And she hosts a monthly radio show, Wabanaki Windows, on WERU Community Radio. The University of New England houses her papers and sponsors an annual lecture series in her name. And I'm just so glad to welcome Donna Loring to be our next reader.
Thank you, Meg. And I'm very happy to be here to read. So here's my poem. We are the first people and the First Nations of this country named America. The Europeans invaded our country to own the land and the resources within it, financed by the bankers and the merchants of England and Europe. We had families, land, governments. We fought to protect them. We fought for over 400 years. We had no banks or corporations to finance our warriors. Still, our First Nations fought many wars against these English and European invaders. Wars ended with treaties. Treaties were always made to take Native nations, Native nations were never made whole. Treaties were all broken. It was during these wars that this America, this country, was founded. First Nations helped the invaders fight against the English homeland. First Nations were promised equality and partnership with these rebel forces who wanted their own country. First Nations were the allies of these American rebels. Promises and treaties were made. Treaties and promises were all broken, every single one. The bankers and the corporations gained much wealth. The founding fathers, fresh from fighting and treating and stealing our lands, wrote a constitution that excluded all the First Nations. They said we were savages, not to be trusted, that we impeded progress. We were made foreigners in our own land. They promised many things, but delivered nothing. The First Nations were left with no land, no resources, broken treaties. We are the first people and the First Nations of this country named America. First Nations were left out of the protections of that document, the United States Constitution. We were lied to, we were used, we have suffered genocide, we have lost generations. We are made invisible, we are marginalized, we are kept in poverty, we are left with no voice, we are not heard. We are the first people of this country named America. We know that you fear us. We know that you have chosen to forget us, America. We know you have chosen to turn a deaf ear to our voices. We know you fear acknowledging what you have done to us. We know you cannot and would not give us our land back. We know that unless you admit what you have done to us, we know that unless you find a way to assist us in reconstructing our communities, we know that unless you stop creating laws that keep us in poverty, you will never be that beacon of human rights and civility you falsely claim to be. Now, America, own up to what you've done to the First Nations, the first people of this land. Until our history is acknowledged and your debt is paid, this country named America will never and can never take its place as the greatest nation in the world. We are the first people and the First Nations of this country named America. The first people wait for you to recognize them. The first people wait for you to acknowledge their genocide. The first people wait for justice. The first people wait for retribution. All over this country, women are marching now. Women, the path makers. The world is watching us. The time is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. The time is now, and that powerful call to acknowledgement. Thank you so much. I'm going to keep on going. Here, you know, it's kind of hard to just move to the next one with such impact from each of these readings, but I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to introduce Laura Bonazzoli. Laura's poetry has appeared in anthologies and in dozens of literary magazines, and is forthcoming in the Lyric, the Naugatuck River Review, the Northern New England Review, and Tiny Seed Literary Journal. She's also published short stories and essays and has recently finished a novel. A freelance writer and editor based in Midcoast, Maine. You can visit her website at laurabonazzoli.com and on Instagram at Laura Bonazzoli. And you can see it's 2 Z's and 1 L, which I've learned. And I really welcome Laura to read next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meg. I really appreciate that. The poem doesn't need any introduction, but I will explain that it emerged from a memorial protest for George Floyd that was held last year. And at that time, we didn't know what we now know, that Derek Chauvin actually knelt on George Floyd's neck for more than 9 minutes. So part of the protest was, it was very central to the protest that the woman who was organizing it said 8 minutes, 46 seconds. So that made its way into the poem. And I haven't changed that because it's a historical record of the poem, of the event itself. So the name of the poem is At the George Floyd Memorial Protest, June 19th, 2020, Rockland, Maine. A voice calls out, lie down in the street when the alarm sounds, face down, hands clasped together behind your back, 8 minutes, 46 seconds. So we march in silence until the alarm sounds. Then we all lie down in the street, face down, hands clasped together behind our backs. I'm a grown woman, but I've never lain down in the street before. Don't know, it feels like fear, feels like humiliation, like being a child when your father takes off his belt and says, pull down your pants. Or maybe some guy at work comes up behind you, traps you between the counter and his chest, his groin, and you squirm and plead because that's what a caught body does, trying to get free. I'm a grown woman with a grown woman child, but I've never cried in the street before. Don't know, the tears are just the first surprise. Don't know how soon a face down, how soon a chest heavy on the hot asphalt burns to lift, how soon a neck stretches to hold the lips above the grit, the dust. This is how soon shoulders pulled back ache to slacken, hand holding wrist and wrist held, strain to break free, to make an arc of grace above the shame. A breeze off the sea ripples my shirt. I turn my head, watch a gull sail cool and sweet until a voice calls out, he said, I can't breathe, and our breath stirs the dust. He said, Mama, Mama, and we invoke love. He said, some water or something, and we thirst for justice. He said, please, sir, please, please. And we pray the names of our brothers and sisters. And I watch the gull skim the air and disappear until all I can see is the cloudless, the blue, the empty of all but light, blind, bright sky. Thank you.
Well, Laura, thank you for reading that. When you read that last July on the Post Corner, it moved me just as much to hear it again today. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Our next reader will be Katherine Hagopian Berry. She has published her first collection called Mask Year and had poems appear in the Cafe Review, Rise Up Review, and Glass Poets Resist, among other places. And Katherine, welcome to the Poets Corner.
Thank you so much, Meg and Katherine and Poets Corner, Claire, Agnes, and Literal Books. It's an honor to be here. So my poem came from searching for a way in to a situation which, was devastating in the depth of its injustice. I don't think it's really news that there has been a huge problem in America with honoring Black lives, but you reach a point where you need to put your own voice into that acknowledgement. The title of this poem comes from the tagline of the Lego City Police Officer play series, which has since actually been removed for consideration in light of the events of the summer for perhaps some of the same reasons that this poem tries to speak to. So the poem is Real Life Scenes. In Lego City, police van doors open independent of their yellow officer, frozen in his plastic body bag on the kitchen counter. Helmets, handcuffs quickly assemble. You choose robbers. Their red monster truck magnetic, giggle vault through bank walls, spilling square dollars. I, the law, chase back and forth until retribution tires. Everything repaired, repaid. We took the Lego jail down years ago. Your favorite part, the trap door, escape where none seemed possible. You leave it on the nightstand, an exit to dreams. I have stopped asking if you want to be a cop. Tuck stories of heroes around you like the Star Wars blanket. Every stormtrooper, lost father, gets a second chance. Curled beneath hot sheets, I piece finaled the butterfly puzzle. Orange for warning, fragile membrane pearl black. We saw one over the lake today, cold with desire, wing beat driving over and over the siren sky.
Wonderful, Katherine. You know, I'm just struck by all the different ways into understanding and feeling about this, and what an unusual through these Lego creatures and the childlike innocence of that. Thank you. Our next reader will be Ellen Goldsmith. Ellen is a poet and a teacher, the author of Where to Look, Such Distances, and No Pine Tree in This Forest is Perfect, which won the Hudson Valley Writers Center's 1997 chapbook contest. Her poems have appeared in numerous journals. She holds an EDD from Teachers College, Columbia University, and is Professor Emeritus of the City University of New York, and lives in Cushing, Maine.
Thank you.
Please welcome Ellen.
Thank you, Meg. And I'm so delighted to see some of my friends and family who don't live here. So another thank you to Zoom for allowing a wider circle. And thank you so much, Claire. I wouldn't have written these two poems had I not received the invitation to submit to this book, which made me think more deeply about some things than I might have otherwise. The first poem is entitled When I Didn't Protest. Just out of college, I was an English teacher at a Brooklyn high school with late afternoon classes full of students counting the days until they could drop out. Nothing in the conventional textbook sparked a response. So I looked around and found That Word Black by Langston Hughes, which ends with the question, what's wrong with Black? In those days, we submitted lesson plans in advance. For the first time, the department chair called me into her office. With no preliminaries, she told me I couldn't present that rabble-rousing, inciting essay. And I didn't. Today, well into my 70s, I re-examine the essay, marvel at the power of words, its insight into how the unexamined can oppress. It makes a case for giving the word Black the beauty of the earth, which is Black. It suggests making white bad. There's no going back to the 22-year-old who didn't argue, didn't take the risk of disobedience. There's no knowing if protest on my part would have made a difference. I am writing this to sign on to speaking out, taking the risk. I am writing this so whoever reads this poem looks back and looks forward. The next poem is entitled Changing the Metaphors. That's why we're toppling Confederate monuments, replacing the Mississippi flag, rethinking the mission of police departments, unearthing the underbellies of our prejudices. At my daughter's college graduation many years ago, the speaker addressed inequality and the racial divide. We can look at it, he said, as a cigarette burn on your linen tablecloth and cover it up with an embroidered napkin. Or we can see it for what it is, fault lines beneath the earth's surface. Are the murders of Eric Garner and George Floyd what the fault lines were waiting for? Are we who are not Black or brown listening more deeply to the truths of slavery, hearing the moans of loss along with the words, "I can't breathe," hearing the pain of continuing transgressions, outrage, and revulsion? When I came to the coast, I was entranced by the tides, their regularity, their promise of return. But now I reject the back and forth of the tides of history, want to embrace new metaphors. A carrier pigeon not stopping until the message is delivered. The power of the ocean, visible in its waves, inexorable in its currents.
Thank you, Ellen. I love the questions that you ask of us and of yourself in these two poems. Very powerful. Thank you. Our next reader is Myronn Hardy. He is the author of 5 books of poems, most recently Radioactive Starlings, published by Princeton University Press in 2017. His poems have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, the Virginia Quarterly Review, the Baffler, Rhino, and elsewhere. And he teaches at Bates College. So welcome, Myronn.
All right, thank you, Meg, and thank you all for being here. So I'm just going to read one poem. The poem is called Merely. A man was shot dead on my street. The addicts watched him being pushed into a truck, white cloth over him. His lover in the doorway twitching. The doorway knows she'll be dead soon. The basilica bells couldn't save them despite their gloriousness. The gloriousness in us can condemn. This country, the world afraid of beauty, of being finally healed. No one below. To be merely ourselves. No one, nothing hoisting. No one, nothing smashing to gravel. No need for loud crowds reminding us that we can't breathe.
Thank you, Myronn. I just love that line, the world afraid of beauty. What would it be like? Thank you. Our next reader will be Lois Ann. Lois is an artist, a visual artist and a writer who has had a studio in Rockland, Maine for over 40 years. Currently, she's writing poems and experimenting with collage and other hybrid pieces that combine the visual element with text areas. Sounds very exciting. Lois, please join me in welcoming Lois Ann.
Thank you, Meg, and thank you, Poets Corner. I also want to thank Claire and Agnes for editing enough, our fellow poets, and all those listening here today. I'm going to read one poem entitled Evicted from the Dream Shelter. The epigraph, and I'll show you a young man with so many reasons why, and there but for fortune may go you or I. Those are words from the Phil Oakes song, There But For Fortune, which some of you may recognize as it's been recorded by Joan Baez and numerous others. Soup kitchens closed, dumpsters locked, even the seagulls are hungry in these raging and virus times, and someone sings, There But For Fortune. Ragged wool, tattered blanket, splinters from that wooden bench, last week's papers, an empty pail, and someone goes on about some fortune. Strung out, strung up, frayed cuffs, buttons gone, and so is everything else. Wool, leather, shell, bone, skin, and song. And someone don't know nothing about misfortune. Thank you.
I think Meg was having some connection problems because she froze there at the end. And Roger, are you still there? Can you tell us what's going on with Meg?
I'll check with her. Hang on.
Okay. See, do we know who was Meg thinking was going to be next, or who hasn't spoken yet? And could you step in and maybe go ahead and speak?
Hello? Hello?
Oh, she's back.
Hello?
We hear you. Yep.
Yeah, I
Kathleen?
That should be Carol.
it's Carol Bachofner, and I just thought
Carol.
I'd introduce her.
It would be Carol Bachofner next.
Maybe
Hi, this is Meg. I'm sorry I got kicked off, and I'm back, and I think I missed Lois, but hopefully she read, and I'm sure it was wonderful. I'm sorry I missed it, but I will catch the recording, and I'm happy to introduce Carol, if that's what's next. Carol Bachofner is a poet, watercolorist, and photographer, the author of 7 books, recently The Boyfriend Project, Native Moons, Native Days, and Test Pattern, a fantad of prose poems. Her poetry is widely anthologized and appears in dozens of journals. Carol served as Poet Laureate of Rockland, Maine from 2012 to 2016. And I'm very excited to welcome her to the Poets Corner.
Hi, everyone. And I want to thank Claire and Agnes and Literal Books, which is just such a wonderful entity we're very fortunate to have here in Maine. And I'm going to read 2 poems this afternoon. The first one is Tired, Oh So Tired. 58 years in, too tired to walk that far, so I run to type up letters, run to call anyone who will listen, feel the run of old tears on my cheeks, run out of the will to forgive. My vision of the past is a falling down and getting up again, but now a fall could end me. I am a brittle heart, tired of falling. I am afraid no one is listening, still not listening. I do not fear the dogs or the water cannons anymore, or the arrests, mostly symbolic. I no longer carry bail money sewn into the hem of my skirt. I do not fear someone coming to my door in the middle of the night the way others fear this, the way others know it will happen, with a knock or without. I do not fear for what will befall this body, but I fear the random incident that takes away someone I do not even know. I am tired, oh, so tired, afraid that I will wake some winter morning to find real has given way to nightmare. 58 years and counting how much more there is for me to do. I don't know how to pray anymore. Don't know if anyone is listening. Hail Mary, full of grace. And that poem came from the time when I protested on the Edmund Pettus Bridge with John Lewis and Martin Luther King, although I never got to meet either one of them, sadly. The second poem is called We've Been Too Long Asleep in the Graveyards of Our History. Encircled by burial niches in burning meadows, we are asleep. The whole world has been watching us destroy it. Wordlessly, it watches because we cannot speak its true language. We are deaf to it and blind. Its fingers are spelling, tapping, ... dash, 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 ... Wasn't this supposed to be paradise? Who has been fully awake to the commerce of humans? Who has arisen from sleep to see the damage? Who has called out in the middle of the nightmare of the graveyard? Not the women of noir, not the men of lost ships. Days of wind are years long, but wasn't this supposed to be paradise? What I seek, what I have screamed into the turgid sea, is not an absence of destruction, not an absence of violence, not an absence of injustice. It seems I don't know any prayers. We are sounding the whistle and blowing the horn again. We are calling, not in anonymous letters, but in bold strokes on the streets, in the sorrow of prophets, in the spark of fires. The world is at the window watching, ear cupped to the sound, drowning out the lies at last. What I sought on the bridge in Selma, chained to the fence at Seabrook Nuclear Plant, what I sought from my small town in Maine, and what I seek still, is the absence of absence. After all, wasn't this supposed to be paradise?
That was wonderful, Carol. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next reader is Meghan Sterling. Her first full-length poetry collection called These Few Seeds is forthcoming from Terrapin Books this April, this month. And she lives in Portland with her family. And welcome to the Poets Corner. Meghan.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Literal Books and Claire, for creating this really important and beautiful work, which I'm honored to be in. I'm going to read the poem that is in Enough. It's a poem that came about through my experience as a mother. Being a mother is the lens that I see pretty much everything through since I had my daughter. She just turned 4. And well, the poem, I suppose, speaks for itself. It's called Loon Stabs Bald Eagle Through the Heart the Same Week George Floyd is Murdered. Every mother knows this fear. Dreams that have kept me up nights. thick-necked stranger grabs at my infant daughter, the roar of rising waters wresting her from my arms. And now, a policeman kneeling on her neck as she calls my name. She is 3, and I still dream she is a newborn, my DNA dictating me to organize every part of my life to protect her, my body arranging to become a shield. It just happens. You look into the face of your child, petal soft and gaping like a fish, and you resolve that you would kill for her. The loon was no different. The chick she lay, that she carried across waters, cradled in her wings, grasped to death by the eagle who thought this was just another answer to hunger. But we mothers know the brutal acts possible. The fingers that stroke our infant's hair would stab out a man's eyes without joy, urged to murder by the simple fact of animal justice. And the grief that propelled the mother's beak to pierce the eagle's heart as fast and clean as a bullet is the grief that all mothers flinch to mention. And the man on the ground, as breath failed him, calling out mama as he was murdered by a policeman, is the voice that haunts us. Every mother who heard that call cries out in answer, "Darling, we are coming." Thank you.
I love this poem, Meghan, and I love all the parallels that you draw that bring it home. Thank you. And our final reader this afternoon is Kathleen Ellis. And Kathleen's most recent poetry collections are Outer Body Travel and Narrow River to the North. Her poems have recently appeared in the Cafe Review, A Dangerous New World, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis, and this anthology that we're reading from today. She is the recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Maine Arts Commission. She teaches poetry and creative writing at the University of Maine, Orono, and coordinates the annual Poets Speak event in Bangor. She has taught poetry writing workshops at the Farnsworth Art Museum since 1994. And welcome to the Poets Corner, Kathleen. And you're still muted.
Yeah, got it.
Great.
Yeah, thank you everyone who was responsible for organizing this. I know how much it takes to coordinate events like this, so I really appreciate it. And thank you to Claire for being one of the co-editors for this marvelous collection. And I'm just going to read one poem. We were reading The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin in class, and we were getting very angry and we were getting very upset. And we were mostly all white, not all of us were white. And we were still getting very, very angry. This was just a few weeks ago. And I said, what we need to read is The Villanelle by Dylan Thomas, Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night. And so we read it. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rage at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So we read it through, we read it again, and it was in my head. And I wrote this poem called Where Are You, Jimmy, When We Need You More Than Ever. And the word rage had to come into it. So it's a villanelle, and that means, of course, that it has 5 verses that are just 3 lines, and then the final 4-line stanza. And I have taken out pieces from Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, and they are the middle line of each stanza. So I'll try and change my voice when his comes in. And it's an entreaty, it's a plea, it's a beseechment. Okay. Where are you, Jimmy, when we need you more than ever? Where are you, Jimmy Baldwin, in a rage almost all the time, when we need you more than ever? Have you seen the latest news? To act is to be committed. Where are you, Jimmy Baldwin? Color is not personal, it's political. To be a Negro in this country, and we need you more than ever. People are not anxious to be equal. You cannot fix what you will not face. Where are you, Jimmy Baldwin? The old America is falling down. The challenge is in the moment, and we need you more than ever. So we entreat, cajole, beseech you. The impossible is the least we can demand. Where are you, Jimmy Baldwin, when we need you more than ever? Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. What a beautifully crafted and powerful vignette.
Thanks.
I am always in awe of people that can write in a form. That's great. That was great. So we're going to open it up for discussion. I'm at a different computer. I'm on my husband's iPad at the moment, so I'm going to try to monitor the chat from here to keep an eye for people that are posing questions in the chat. But somebody put a comment, I wish I could see that poem. I think that Claire is going to put a link to the book in the chat from Literal Books. It is a wonderful book, enough poems of resistance and protest, and all of these are in the book and worth, it's definitely worth buying. We'll also post those that will allow us to on the website afterwards. But having read all of these poems prior to this reading, it just struck me how powerful it is to hear them and to hear the poets read them. And I apologize for my dogs barking in the background. I'm usually in a quieter place. So I have a question to kick us off with, perhaps, and then I just want to see all of our readers participate in a conversation, and not formal conversation. I see Claire just put the link in the chat for you. So, and I would start with a line from what Claire read about the poem about the lynching. It is never innocent what I know or don't know. And that really struck me and in so many of these poems that we are collectively taking a responsibility that perhaps we didn't take to understand, to look at history, to actually not turn our eyes away from things that perhaps we haven't had directly in our field of vision. And so I wondered if any of you might kind of speak to that, and how has your awareness changed, or how did this events of this past year motivate you to write and to look at things differently than you have before?
Start with that. I think that I don't know if it's okay to be blunt, but I think that you're still not able to hear. Are you all able to hear me?
Nope.
You can.
I can hear you. It's great,
Okay.
Claire. Thank you.
I think that the Trump administration had, obviously themes that have always been very problematic in the United States became much more saliently problematic. There was, I think the comedian Aziz Ansari made a joke at the very beginning of the Trump administration, well, I didn't realize that people not being racist was a form of their being polite. And I'd like to ask everyone to go back to being polite, even if you actually, right? So I think that political climate it's not that things hadn't been very problematic before, because I think, as I wrote in the introduction, right, the death of Tamir Rice was, for me, I mean, and of course, that just goes back to Emmett Till, and that goes back to the 1890s, and that goes, I mean, you keep going back further and further, and you really don't reach the end of it. But I do think the Trump administration, just not only its overt policies, but also just its attitude toward equality made it begin to feel quite terrifying to be part of this country. And you would start to feel that, silence is not, no longer wise in any way. So yeah, I don't want to take up other people's airtime, but that's one answer to that question.
And is that, Claire, what prompted you to put together this collection?
Oh, yes. I mean, again, it's not that George Floyd was the first or the worst, but the flagrancy and the way that the Trump administration had courted the police and, kind of opened up this sociological space where overt racial violence was seemingly more accepted. That seemed to be the difference. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think I saw something, a comment from Carol in the chat about Floyd being today's version of lynching. Do you want to say something about that, Carol?
Sure. It's really been on my mind. I've been watching the trial, the Chauvin trial, and I keep coming back to this thought that, we are maybe even more overt in this country than the times when people were hanged from trees. We have seen such violence in the streets, and every time I watch any part of the videos, which are so chilling and disgusting and disturbing, I keep saying, we as a country watched live and on TV a person being lynched. And I realize that there are all kinds of lynchings, and I just can't get it out of my mind. In fact, I'm writing a series of poems on the trial. And they're hard to write, but I think as Claire said, we can't be quiet, so I think what we as poets have to do is to take every aspect of that which disturbs us and unwrap it and put it out there so that it's not a secret and it's not glossed over and it's not a joke. The defense attorney is really irritating in the fact that he's glib, but worse than that, that he has the nerve, the utter nerve to try to blame George Floyd for his own lynching. So that's it. That is just something that permeates every aspect of my life right now. I don't think it's going to go away until I get these poems done. And even then, probably not.
Well, thank you for writing them. As you said, and as Claire said, we can't be innocent and we can't be quiet.
Well, if we're quiet, we're guilty. We're complicit if we're quiet. So I don't want to bear that burden. It's too heavy.
Any other comments on this question of the innocence or awareness, perhaps?
I would just like to echo what both Claire and Carol have said. And plus, if we, look around the globe, and at other cultures and throughout other, centuries, it's the poets who speak out. I mean, how many countries are how many poets right now in jail for having spoken out? And to echo what Claire said, if that unfortunate administration had continued on in this country, I mean, many of us here today could be sitting here in our orange jumpsuits. I mean, it's, but yet I feel that, you know, we need to speak. I mean, that's what we have. We have the gift of our voices, and we need to use them. And it's unfortunate that we have to do it, but I feel that it is needed.
Thank you.
So and thank you for providing, you know, this forum for us. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I know that Donna in her poem calls for us to look at, she had a line about a fear of acknowledging. And I was struck by that. And it's acknowledging not only the Black Lives Matter and these, but acknowledging a history of genocide and racism and oppression. And I wondered if how we deal with that today. Is it in, you know, is it sufficient to speak out? Is there a reconciliation? Is there reparations that we're calling for in a different way? I know that, you know, for instance, Laura's poem about being at the protest and feeling the feeling of lying against the pavement, you know, brought it home for me in a very visceral way as a white woman living in one of the whitest states in the country. You know, how do we experience it? How do we acknowledge this history, and what do we do with that knowledge? So any comments on that?
Well, I have a comment.
Yes.
I may not be a direct response to what your question, but I think that I look at symbolically the United States as maybe being a tree of freedom or whatever. And a tree is only as good as its roots. The roots of this country are not solid. When you look at how it was founded, our founding fathers were, when I say it, were white supremacists. And the reason I say that is because when they wrote the Constitution, they didn't involve women. They didn't involve African Americans. They didn't involve Native Americans. We need to recognize the roots of this country and go back to the beginning to see how we can fix things. One of the things that I've sort of advocated for in Maine is for Maine to go back to its roots, its Constitution, and how that was written and what was left out of that. So, you know, I think we really need to get a handle on our history because this, the Floyd case, that event, the hatred which came all bubbling up from Trump and his presidency, and it was just stirring something up that's already been there. It's been there for centuries.
Thank you, Donna. And your poem made that so clear in so many ways. And that clarity is so helpful. And it's also difficult to know how we go about doing that, but that's not our job here today. I think our job here today is that job of listening and awareness. And I think in Ellen's quote from the Langston Hughes essay is how the unexamined can oppress. So if we don't, as you said, Donna, go back to our roots, if we don't look at our own history, then we're not examining and we are contributing to oppression.
Meg,
Yes.
directly following what you just said, I've been thinking for the last 5 minutes of Richard Blanco's poem, Easy Lynching on Herndon Avenue,
Yep.
which you probably know. Incredibly powerful poem. And he ends the poem, long, long poem, but he ends it by saying, forgive us to trust this kind of thing, lynching, doesn't happen anymore. Stay blind, no rope, no blood, no body, to the life of a boy named Michael, invisible in this photo. That is, until we dare to look hard and deep and long enough. And that's really what you're saying, is what I think we've all been saying. We all need to do this. And when I think back to Obama's inauguration, I was filled with joy, but I was naive. We still had so much work to do then, and we now realize, I think, the depth of looking and confronting our history that we still need to do.
Thank you, Laura. And, you know, I've had the privilege of hearing Richard talk about the writing of that poem and how to approach it, you know, as a Cuban American, you know, not Black person, and how just the process of writing the poem helped him become aware of his own family's history and prejudices, his own, and all of that. And I think somehow perhaps the writing of these poems, you know, as poets, we become aware of ourselves in a different way. It's an exploration, but it's also a discovery. Anybody want to comment on that or on some of the other things that have come forward? There's a question.
Yeah, I'll say one thing, Meg.
Yeah.
You know, everything that everyone's saying is great. And one of the things that's striking to me is the range and depth of all of these poems, how each of them comes from a different place, takes a different angle, uses a different form. And I just hope that speaks to the idea of multiplicities and the ways that we can all approach this very difficult but extremely important question.
Thank you so much, Ellen. That's beautifully put. And I think for me as an editor, this reading in particular has been very moving. I mean, I think we've had a few other readings, but this is the one that's included the largest number of poets. And right, it really is all these different perspectives that are made the work of editing a book so rich. And I think, you know, in the end, like it's any change in our society has to be deeply collaborative, right? It has to be coming from many different perspectives, because you can't have one group of people can't change everything. America is a multiplicity, and you really need the multiplicity working together to make real change. So thank you, Ellen.
Claire, I have a question related to that. So there's a certain element of self-selection that happens to who's come to a reading like this, who's willing to participate in this conversation. And it is probably not the people that, you know, that were Trump supporters or whatever, that they stormed, certainly not the ones that stormed the Congress or participate in some of these. But how do we provoke or provoke is probably not the word, encourage a conversation that crosses some of those divides to find our common humanity, or don't we?
I don't know if I'm any more qualified to speak to that than anyone else, but I could briefly say that I, growing up in the deep South, and right, I'm originally from Georgia. And Georgia, of course, as we know, Stacey Abrams kind of pulled off a miracle there and turned the state blue. But there are people that I don't think you'll ever change their minds, and you shouldn't even try because you'll only get hurt. But I think it's more the people who are, I don't know, sort of the disaffected margin, who just don't know what to think, don't know, something doesn't feel right to them, but they don't know what it is, that those are the people to reach. I don't think the people who stormed the Capitol would be in that group. But I think there are always people who are unsure, and that's the people to speak to. Not the people who are going to immediately say, well, to say to someone like me, like, know your place, girl, because that's really something you would hear if you tried to speak up in my community in Georgia. So yeah, so it's the people who might be more, at the edges of beliefs rather than in the core center. Like, I think by the time someone's storming the Capitol, they're pretty far gone.
Yeah, I think perhaps you're right, Claire, and yet we do have some common humanity across, and I don't know how we reach that per se. Yes, there is a huge middle that we don't necessarily see because we see extremes on either side, and we don't kind of get to an understanding in the middle. And yet I'm struck by how wide the gulf becomes. Anybody else want to comment on that? Because I have another question I'd like to throw out, but I'd love to hear some other comments on that particular topic.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm on topic. I'm never on topic. But I think those of us who are teachers or who are in another capacity where we have a group of people who are actually listening to us once in a while, that we have to do what Rachel Carson did, and it is Earth Month as well, it's environment. So we are celebrating the Earth, and we're celebrating her. And here she had breast cancer and was working on Silent Spring and managed to get it out. But Linda Lear, who's written the biography about her, says in the introduction to her book that Rachel Carson intended to disturb and disrupt, and she did so with dignity and deliberation. I really like that you can't give up. You just have to keep going, and one by one. And I love it when students say, well, I don't really believe in that, but I'll listen to what you have to say. And that's what we have to teach people, is to listen to what other people have to say. And it's a huge job. It's a huge job for everybody. And also, what Donna said, Loring said about knowing who we are, knowing where we came from, knowing what this country has begun as and how it holds on to that for dear life, and speaking out about it. And that's about all I want to speak out about right now.
That's wonderful. It's that obligation as a teacher as well as a poet to speak out. And the light in your hair, Kathleen, is just gorgeous.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Which, comes to me, another question I have. I think there's a line, if Myron's still on, that he had in one of his poems about the world afraid of beauty. And I just want to ask you about that incredible line and what's behind that in your thinking. And
so Myronn actually had to sign off.
Did he?
I mean, I think one of the other poets, if they wish, could speak to that line. It is a beautiful, beautiful poem, beautiful line.
Anybody want to speak to that? And I just want to scan the chat again and see there's I love this we have to make listening an epidemic. That's wonderful. And there's a comment from Jane. I might not pronounce your last name right, so Mushbach.
That's
but
right.
Thank
That's
you.
right.
That today is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and that she had watched at 3 o'clock right before this reading memorialized one particular group of the millions of murdered Jews. That is the 150,000 Sephardic, is that how you say it? Sephardic Jews in Greece and the Balkans, and it took 4 decades before Greece even acknowledged the genocide in their line. So I applaud the aspect of these poems devoted to recognition of the horror at the root of our country, the serious dawning of the truth and awareness that are so important as a basis for urgently needed action. And thanks very much to this program and to all the poets, and how beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you. I do, before we close, want to mention a few other things coming up, if I could take some time for that. On Saturday, April 17th, which is next Saturday, Kevin Pilkington's book launch is at 4 p.m. Kevin has read on the Poets Corner. He's a poet from New York. His new book is called Playing Poker with Tennessee Williams. And I have that one right here. And it's just delighttul. He's a wonderful poet. I recommend it. There's a link to the virtual book launch on his website. That's Kevin Pilk, KEVINPILK.com. On Thursday, April 22nd, the Rockland Public Library is hosting a reading of poets who have written in response to artwork in the Farnsworth collection. That's at 6:30 p.m. And Ellen, how does one get a link to that? Is that on the Rockland Public Library site?
Well, I think it probably is. And the person's name who's coordinating it, her name is M. Lewis, and contacting her at the Rockland Public Library.
Great, great. Thank you. I'm looking forward to reading with that group. And on Thursday, April 29th at 7 o'clock, the Rockport Public Library group, which is also called the Poets Corner, is hosting a virtual National Poetry Month reading in coordination with the Good Turn Natural Food Store. And I believe the link to that is on the Rockport Public Library site. And if you're missing any of those, you can email the Poets Corner Maine. I have links to all of these. And the last but not least, on Saturday, April 24th, from 1 to 3 o'clock, will be Eco Poetry, Voices from the Earth in Crisis. And several of today's readers, Carol Bachofner, Ellen Goldsmith, Kathleen Ellis, as well as John Paul Caponegro and Kristen Lindquist will be reading then. So I'm really looking forward to that. There's lots of celebrations going on of National Poetry Month, of Earth Day, and so many things for us to look forward to. We will be sending out an email from the Poets Corner, just letting you know about these events and our upcoming June 13th reading, which I hope you will not miss.
Meg?
Yes.
For the Eco Poetry session, people can register on the Farnsworth Museum website.
Great, thank you for adding that. Ellen. And, you know, I think we can, if Rich is here, just open up the mics for the last few minutes. But I want to thank all of our readers today. There's been incredible poetry, a wonderful conversation as well. And I thank you all for both writing these poems, for creating this anthology, Claire, and for bringing it to us here at the Poets Corner.
Yeah, I also really wanted to thank all the poets for coming to read. You guys were amazing. And thank you, Meg and Katherine, for hosting us. This has been great. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Mike's, if you wanted to unmute and just join me in a round of applause, I would absolutely welcome doing that for our poets. So I'm going to give you a minute to unmute your mics so we can, I don't know if we can hear that joint applause.
You have to one at a time. You need to put down multiple, but.
All right, we'll do Zoom applause.
Wonderful.
It was terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.